Our guest this month is Jake Fader, a producer and composer. Jake Fader works on Grammy-nominated and Emmy award-winning projects, advertising spots of all shapes and sizes, and some strange and fantastic records. Jake is the founder of music production and licensing company Other Animal, along with drummer and producer Joe Tomino. Some clients and projects include Miller Lite, Chevy, Apple, Pepsi, Belkin Electronics, the Masters Tournament, Netflix Originals, Ugly Delicious, and Abstract, the Art of Design. Sometimes he scores feature-length films such as the award-winning documentary Romeo is Bleeding. Jake is also a multi-instrumentalist who has toured and played all over the U.S. and Europe with bands like Mifune, Kokolo, and currently Hello 3D, a psychedelic cumbia band. And the reason for this episode: Jake loves tape machines, and what they can do for the creative and sonic aspects of music production. He has devoted a significant amount of his time and effort in putting together a small collection of multi-track and two-track tape machines that he uses in his everyday workflow. If you follow him on Instagram, you will see his adventures into his tape-saturated workflow, which we will definitely get into. We'll also talk about tape plugins, which are widely available and expertly emulated, but is there a best one? And does a tape plugin do the same thing as a real tape machine? The answers to those questions and more on this month's episode of Sound Discussion, the tape episode.
Hello, and welcome to Sound Discussion. Each episode, we discuss a music topic which we have all had first-hand experience with. These will be anything from getting started, recording, playing live, mixing, mastering, and everything in between. Most episodes will have a special guest to bring their professional experience to the discussion. Let's get started.
Jake, welcome to Sound Discussion. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for lending your expertise to tape machines.
Yeah, thanks.
So tell us a little bit about, and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got started and where your love for tape machines kind of came from, because they are definitely a mainstay for you. Mm-hmm. So where did that love start, and how did you keep that going in this day and age of, digital everything?
Mm-hmm. Well, how I started is actually the same story of how I fell in love with tape machines. So the first significant investment I ever made, I had, guitars. I'm a guitarist. That's how I started. I pretty much from an early teenage years, I knew that's what I wanted to do forever. And I wanted to have a guitar in my hand, at least part of my life, till I had no more life. And the first significant investment, I said, well, how do all these records that I've been listening to, how are they made? So I took all of the money that I had and I bought a Tascam Porta 7, which is a 4-track tape machine. Cool kids like them again. They're like fancy. They're like coveted again. It's really wild to me, but I get it. I get it because I actually spent more time after a certain point. There was a tipping point where I spent more time figuring out how to bounce tracks and how to do weird things with a tape machine than I did like playing my guitar. So the ironic thing is that, I was learning all these techniques as a teenager, but what I was recording wasn't very good because I wasn't spending much time. I could do a lot of it. It's just that the actual material wasn't good. It was like, hack covers of the songs that I loved at the time. Never been a Luddite in any way, shape, or form. I've always embraced digital recording. I had a digital rig pretty early on. I had a digital rig in the late 90s with a C Sound Solo. Look it up, kids. It was a pretty, actually really nice interface that had a lot of analog features, because for a while they had to have analog features in the early ones or it would scare people. I also used terrible contraptions like ADATs and Roland 1680s. That's another one. You would record a grand total of 3 minutes before it told you were out of space. And they were really expensive too. And they sounded bad. So, that they had that going for it. And so, for the longest time, what people considered professional multi-track recording was really out of my reach. I wasn't in a band cool enough to go record on a 2-inch Studer for a long time. I wouldn't I heard about it. I saw pictures of this really fat 2-inch tape, but none of the studios I could afford. Studios cost more then than they do now. And that's in $1996. So we were recording on, my first demo ever was like professional demo, which was in a fairly well-appointed basement studio, was on a Fostex 16-track half-inch machine. And I thought that I had made it at that point. I saw an open reel tape machine that wasn't inside of a little window on a Tascam, on my Porta 7. I was like, that's it. So yeah, we could keep going from there, but I feel like I'll just keep talking and talking if you let me. But yeah, so I just to tell you, to bring you up to speed on it and to fast forward a little bit on this, is that tape is kind of always weaved in and out of my life. I made records. I finally got, in order to listen to that first demo and remix it, even though it ended up not being worth it, I ended up getting a Tascam 16-track half-inch machine in the early 2000s, and I made some records on that thing. But I would also make it. I always integrated tape into a digital workflow. So there's been times where I've gone DAW-less or I've gone that way, but really it's been more about how I've used tape machines in conjunction with modern recording. That has brought me more up to, eventually I said, okay, I'm going to get a professional machine. I had a horrible run-in with an MCI machine, and my friend who's, closer to 80 and has seen it all and was a pro and was signed to a bunch of labels. I said, I called him up. I said, hey, I'm so excited. I got this machine. He goes, what did you get? I said, I got this MCI machine. And he laughed and goes, let me know when they let you out of the insane asylum. That's all he said to me. And I was like, whatever, man, I'm going to be the one where this thing doesn't drive me crazy. And it really almost like ended my love affair with tape machines. And then I heard tale of Ampex machines being easier to work on. And I'll tell you what, there's no such thing as an easy tape machine. There really isn't. But the thing is that that's not what it's about. So getting a little off topic, jumping around a bit. But what I will say is that I then learned a lot of how I could bring that sound into my modern workflow. And there are things about it that are really fantastic. And I'm sure we're going to get into it a little bit. So hopefully that was a little bit of it. Even if I jumped around a bit, that was a bit of the history.
Yeah, brilliant. It's one of those. So I'm of the age where my first experience of a recording studio was a 1-inch 8-track tape machine, SMPTE time code, Atari 1040 ST with original Cubase, and nothing ever worked. And it was horrific, and it was really hard work. You'd go in ready, you're all fired up, I'm going to go and play some drums, we're going to lay down some drum tracks, and after 40 minutes of nothing working, it's like, yeah, I've given up now, I can't. So my experience of tape has always been at the back of my mind that it's just pain. Why would anybody? I look at you, I can see it in the back of your room, and I think, hats off to you, it probably sounds amazing, but I'm just looking at it thinking, it's a world of pain. I don't know why you'd do it, but there must be a reason why people want to come to you and use tape.
Yeah. Well, I also had the experience of the first, real studio job I had, which was really funny because people I knew were opening a studio, and they were pretty well funded, but they didn't know they wanted a recording studio. And then and I'm not sure they ultimately did, but they ended up, I ended up becoming like the head engineer of a studio when I didn't deserve to be at all. Like, it was very funny. I got thrown into this thing and I felt really lucky. And I was in a band that was doing okay. So maybe I got in on merit of that and or something, but we had our main recorder, although we did have Cubase, an older version. Our main recorder was a 1-inch 8-track Atari MX70. Heck of a machine. Beautiful. And that one ran really well. And that was the first time where I was just like, oh, it's just like my old 8-track. And I had a console and I was in heaven. I made some fun records on that thing. But I think I can get a little bit more into why someone would do it, right? Because there's a lot of pain. So what, the biggest pain point is that nothing ever worked, and that things would go out, or channels would fail, or what kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, so we had a 16 into 8 Allen and Heath desk, straight into the tape machine, and yeah, channels would fail, or the head would need realigning, or for some reason, just an output from the desk would decide not to send any signal to the tape machine anymore. And it was one of those things that I look back on it nostalgically, and it was an amazing time, first time ever in a studio. It's a warm, fuzzy feeling for me. It's it was incredible. It smelt like a recording studio. It looked like a recording studio. And this was 1990 something like that. So, and it was, but I look at today where you can come into a studio, you can still use a big full console if you want, but you've just got whatever your DAW is that you choose to use, and you hit record and it all works and there's nothing there and you don't have to worry. And the bit that fascinates me is, what's the draw for people to come and record onto tape? What is, because there must be, it's not just about hitting record, right? I'm guessing
because
something
that would
happens.
be my question too.
Something happens.
Why except to just say that you do? It's like, why would someone be a blacksmith at a Renaissance fair? Kind of like that. So we have machines that make the metal,
Okay, I see that.
Yeah. No. Like, listen, it's not just to say that you do. So there's a couple different reasons, and they're actually not always the same reason, even though they overlap. Say I'm going to make a record only on tape. I just did that with my band. I made it on this, and talk about, being in vogue right now. A Tascam 388. Everyone wants these right now again. I think it's thanks to Mac DeMarco. Everybody wants one of these. So, and a couple other artists that are making cool things on them. The reason why you would want to go to tape only is because I have watched over time, it depends what kind of record you're making. If someone were like, hey, I want to make a trap record to tape, I'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Or let's try, that sounds crazy, let's do it, I'm in. It depends like what it is, but I would say I wouldn't do that. If someone said, I want to record a classical quartet to tape, I would say that's insane. Don't do that. Unless you really want it to sound like the 1953 recording of, if it's for a soundtrack, I've done that kind of thing too, where they want it to be period correct. Anyway, that's another story. But what I was going to say is, the reason you would do it to tape with a band is because when you remove infinite possibilities, you force creativity.
Right.
The medium is the driver. All of a sudden, if you don't have a screen, and all of a sudden, if the drummer isn't looking, and I mean that, looking at his parts saying, I can play that better, stop looking at the grid, silly.
Yeah.
Especially depends what kind of record you're trying to make. I mean, a lot of times when people emulate, say someone, I'm going to do something really trite. Say someone emulates Zeppelin, or even the way that Zeppelin would create something as immediate, or Sabbath, or something. Let's just talk about early rock stuff. Those records were made out of urgency and immediacy, especially the early ones before they got indulgent and got $18 billion, per record or per minute. They made those records sometimes on order of 3-4 days, sometimes less. Sometimes it was a week. The reason they were able to make those, and the reason why people care about those records, and Motown records were made one night, you did it, they did it overnight. They made that single. There's not time to agonize when you have to perform. And people perform differently without a net. When they say, okay, you can't go in and quantize, okay, you can't go and do this, I'm actually going to give it a different emotion, knowing that there isn't this polish afterwards. You can't make me sound better later. So I'm going to give it everything I've got up to this point as a musician, because I'm making a record. A lot of times modern record making can feel like data collection and reassembly.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
Also, I can do this with screens off, because I'm trying to think of like the best record I've heard lately. I'm not looking at the latest Tyler, the Creator record. The cover is cool, but I don't stare at it. I listen to it with my ears. I don't I'm not looking at my favorite. I don't look at A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. I sit and I listen to it. So why aren't you sitting and listening to the music that you're making? We only have so much brain processing power. How much of it is dedicated by looking at that UAD UI or GUI?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
So
that's one of my biggest complaints about more modern music ever since the 90s. The 90s were raw. You could feel the emotion, you could hear the emotion, you could hear the imperfections, and that brings out the humanity in it. When the 2000s hit, and auto-tune and being able to Pro Tools thing and quantize things, and the big record companies had so much money, and they were throwing money at it and say, oh, this is the formula for. So early 2000s music just to me just sounds too formulaic. And then later on you take the humanity out of it because you're editing everything. And like that's why I gravitate towards older music like 90s and 80s.
Sure. And I think there's genres that benefit from all these things we're talking about. I think that there's some genres that are made. I love a lot of modern music, and I love music from all eras. And I think that there's some music that wouldn't have been made if we didn't have autotune, if we didn't have the grid. I think that there's things that those tools are perfect for. I think that, or I know that because I've been through this, is that there are sounds and processes that I've seen people kill themselves to try to get in the box, where I'm like, we could just plug into this, right? And it's not just a sonic thing. It's actually just, it's a process thing. Now, that does go into the other reason. Think of tape machines as the best compressor, saturator, EQ that you've ever used.
Wow, that's a statement.
Sorry. They are.
I know what you mean, though. I know where you're going with it. But...
Yeah, that's a qualifying statement. No,
yeah,
they are great. They're great at those things. I shouldn't say the best you've ever used. That's a little bit hyperbolic, but they are great at those things, and they're great at those things simultaneously. I mean, and like really great, or they wouldn't have been. Do you know how many hours of brilliant people went into these things? I mean, like actual smart people. Not pretend ones, like actual smart people built these things and went in and they cared about it. The history of Ampex is crazy. I'm kind of nerd that way, but the way that they went about this, and not many people did it because it was hard and expensive and not cost effective and all these different things. So there are things that went into these machines that are really beautiful. They're the result of a lot of human effort. So that brings me into my other workflow. A lot of times what I'll do is I have it set up in Logic on a template where I can record as many tracks through the Ampex as I want. And I have it synced where you can do as many overdubs as you want. Think of it as a real-time processor. We're not monitoring through the reproduction head, but we have a safety one that's just my direct. So I mult off of my patch bay where I have a direct from my preamplifier. That's being captured. Right under it is the tape track that's coming off the repro head. I have the head gap calculated. So I have a Voxengo plugin in there that calculates the head gap so it realigns. So when I play back, I can listen to the tape track or the capture direct from as you would through your Apollo, through your whatever, through your blah, blah, blah. So I can listen, and sometimes the tape greatly benefits it, and I have that. Sometimes I can still have it. People use plugins to get the tape hiss sound for whatever reason, and that's like, I already have it. There we go. You want it to sound like that? Here we go. Here's the real thing, here's the old track that didn't completely erase because we recorded it too hot. You get everything,
Yeah.
So you can monitor DI and the output from the tape.
Yeah. So I have it set up on my patch bay where there's a mult where it's half normaled, where it's either going directly to the tape, or I can just go pick off of the top from the preamplifier and go right into the converters. Nice. And the other one is a different path into the converters. I wrote an article about it first when Sphere microphone first came out, the modeling microphone, the Townsend one. For Townsend Labs, I wrote this article for them when they were like, wait a minute, are you using a Townsend with a tape machine? And I was like, yeah, this is how I'm doing it. And I talked about it in that way where it was, and I didn't come up with this idea. I just learned about it a long time ago when I was doing, I wanted a clasp system, but I couldn't afford it. That's like an endless analog thing that does the same thing with Pro Tools and a large 2-inch machine. But I couldn't afford a clasp. So I was like, okay, how do I do this DIY? And this was the way. I know that's like really obscure. That might not make for good podcasts. Sorry. Because like it's a little, I know we're here to talk about nerdy stuff. Cool.
Yeah. Nerd out. Absolutely. I've never heard of a clasp system before. I'm going to have to look that one up.
Yeah, they were, I think the funny thing is I think a lot of top level pros, because of the way they have to make records, have abandoned a lot of this stuff. Like, people are selling their studers. They don't care because it's not cost effective in a lot of ways to make records like this. But I think of it like a processor. And the third reason why I use a tape machine in the most often thing is I use it to mix to and to master to. There are times where I've been hired specifically, especially on mastering jobs, specifically because I know how to run a tape machine and have one.
So how does that, sorry, I'm really interested. We're going to nerd out now. So from your mastering process, where does the tape fit? Do you literally master through and then your final output goes to the tape as that final stage, and then that's what you then, is that how that works for you? Sits as the last.
It's like this. Yeah, so it's like not sort of. It's not the way that you would have mastered to it traditionally, where that is the physical master. It's for the sonic benefits, because unfortunately, tape doesn't like to get to modern loudness. So
No.
what? Yeah, and well, fortunately, I should say. I shouldn't say unfortunately. Depends how you look at it. Business wise, unfortunately.
Fortunately, you are correct. Is
Yeah,
the correct term.
Yeah, exactly. So my mastering chain would be that if I'm using an analog mastering chain, it is the 2-track, then through the converters. I have a really lovely Highland Dynamics tube compressor that's much like the Abbey Road 124 RS 124. Into sometimes this chain order changes as you get it. And then I have some Heritage Audio Motor City EQs, the Motown EQs in stereo. The tape machine will get hit. Sometimes one of those is at a different level. I know they can't see my hands on the podcast. It's at a different order in the chain. Like I said, sometimes the compressor's prior to, depending upon and how hard I want to hit it, and then back into the DAW for other processing. And sometimes some of the processing, if I have, soothe, the almighty soothe might go prior to this being sent out. On the way back in is when I do all my loudness and imaging stuff. Usually don't do the imaging on the way in to the tape machine. Not really beneficial that way. But it's funny, I've done the A/B thing where I've done a master that has the analog thing, and the tape's never lost on that. Like, it's never like, even when I'm not even using the other outboard, even when I'm not EQing and compressing, when I'm just doing straight tape, that's never been someone like, oh, I think that I'm going to go with this one. That wasn't the tape one, which is an interesting thing to me. And I think that's because of psychoacoustic loudness, because of the fact that it's the aforementioned one of the best saturators and the quickest compressors in the world. I think that even when it's not louder, it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes people excited about it, because it handles transients in this really unique way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing Nate's going to bring us onto it, but I'm looking forward to your views on tape plugins, because I have one in my mastering chain that every master goes through the tape plugin, because it does something, and I'm not about to say what it does, but it does something that does make it sound better.
Right.
I used to use Slate plugins back in the day, and you didn't have to actually put the compressor on. You just run the audio through in the DAW, and it did something to it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it made it louder. I don't know.
I mean, I have some experience with a couple of different tape machine type of plugins, and they all do something. Whether or not they do the thing is sort of the big question, right? And I think that's where a lot of people sort of, I don't want to say there's a misconception there, because I don't know that that's true, but I don't think a lot of people have the experience with the physical machine that the plugin is emulating. So, for somebody to say, oh, this is the end-all be-all of tape plugins, is it? Because they all do something, and they might do them similarly, they might do them differently, they might do them well, they might do them not well, but they do something. It affects your sound.
I think
so. Yeah. Jake, what's been your experience with hardware versus the plugin world?
Tape emulation plugins are great. I think they're awesome. I think they do really cool things. I think some of them do really cool things. I think that they all, some of them are much, much better than others for different tasks, just like a real tape machine. None of them sound like my tape machines to me. But here's the thing about that. There's never been a proper plugin of a 440. There's one, but it really doesn't count. It doesn't sound good. So it's hard for me to say, well, these don't sound like a 440. Well, none of them are meant to. So I don't know how to say. I've never owned an ATR 102. I don't know if it does. I know that I still use tape plugins. Just because I have this, tape machines behind me doesn't mean that I don't use tape plugins. I do. I think they're great. I think that if you're to ask me to qualify which ones do a tapier thing to me because of all my time, working with tape, then I could talk about that. which ones I like more for what tasks. We can get in and name names if you'd like. But I don't really, let me put it this way. The way I've always put it is that if there were a tape machine emulation that allowed me to really get all of the benefits that we've already discussed, I would have probably like saved the money and the time. Because here's the thing. These things take a lot of time. Like things happen with tape machines. Like they are mechanical. This one here, my Ampex 440B, is one that I just procured recently because it was completely rebuilt. I had one like basically built like it came from Ampex in 1972. Prior to that, I was always battling my old one. I don't want to talk bad about it. It's in the other room. It can hear me. But I was always battling it. This one, even when I got it, even though it was set up by experts, had issues. And the only reason that I knew how to correct those issues was because of the inordinate amount of time that the previously mentioned one trained me to do. And I said, I know what's going on. Okay. It's like being, it's like someone that likes to work on cars. It's the same thing. And not different at all, actually, in a lot of ways, So, but if you were to say, hey, this gives you all these benefits, especially the process benefits, I don't know that I would ditch it because I also like holding things and being tactile. Who doesn't want a really great console? It's the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but let's talk about it. You want to get into tape machine emulation plugins?
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Okay.
Let's nerd out.
The greatest.
We're not beholden to any vendors or anything. Name names.
Let's go. I'm never going to get any kind of endorsements. So here's the deal. I wasn't gunning for him anyway. So here's the deal. For me, on the 2-track, the greatest of all time is what I was saying before. I think the UAD ATR is incredible. I think there's something really well done about that one. It hit the mark. It's also cool for slapback on a bus.
That's my favorite is slapback on vocals. It's so good.
It's great. It's fantastic. It's great. The Studer one, the A800, is actually really good.
That one lives on my bus, the A800.
On the 2 bus?
On the 2 bus.
That's interesting. That was never intended for that. That's it.
That lives on my 2 bus, and it doesn't always, like sometimes I'll turn it off.
Yeah.
But I'd say 8 times out of 10, it's on. I'm tweaking some settings to taste, but it's always there, ready to go.
Here's a fun trick. So. You ever mess with the bias in that one inside of it while you're playing? Yeah. When you're playing with an instrument, you can get that thing gnarly. It's way fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could do it with the real tape machine. I sometimes do that with individual tracks. I'll mess with bias while I'm recording it to get it to grind out. And I don't know how much I'm into breaking things. I love when things are broken on the way in, like where you can't fix it.
What is bias? I'm sorry. I've never recorded. I've been in bands that have.
Yeah.
And I've maybe played bass while there was some tape machine recording before, but everything that I've experienced was always in the box digital. So bias?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair question. No, what is bias?
Yeah, so this is where you out me as not an actual electrical engineer. But what my limited and probably very correctable understanding of bias is that it has to do with the level of erasure and magnetism going to the tape, and how much current is going, and that affects all kinds of things like signal to noise ratio, frequency response, erasure depth, all those different things. Again, an actual engineer that understands these things could greatly correct me.
But you know what? Those are details that are
my understanding of it. Make things sound different. That's what my caveman like. Yeah. And I know how to set it when I'm aligning the machine. Sort of.
Is it like a switch?
Oh, sorry, it's a dial.
Knob or?
It's a dial.
Oh, no. I'm just curious.
Yeah, you need like those little covers. Like there's covers in there. You take those off, and there's a bunch of screwdriver things. If you open up that Ampex thing, you know what? One of the best ways to do it is probably mess with the plugin that has the bias, like the A800 one. A80, 800. So I might even be saying that wrong.
Is it?
I don't know.
Is it the A880?
A80.
It is. I think it is A80.
I added a 0.
And I followed suit. So
whatever. My attention to detail is being brought out here. So, you mess with that and it can change. It can do some pretty cool things distortion wise. I like both of those very much. I love I used to really love the Waves J37 for a lot of cool things. But but I don't have any Waves things. Although I can have any Waves plugin I want for 2 years for $29. I understand, but then after that, it's $500.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works.
Yeah. So that's why I don't have any.
You better hope you haven't used it, because if you need to recall that session, it's $500.
When I realized their tactics, I then said, I can't do this. We're breaking up. That's it. We're done.
Yeah.
I think we've all been down that road, haven't we? We've all been down that road. Oh, look how cheap these are. I'm going to get loads of these, and then no.
But I miss the J37, and I miss the Abbey Road chambers and the Abbey Road. Actually, a lot of the Abbey Road stuff I miss. I think those are great. The soft tube tape one is really fantastic, actually.
That's the one that's on my mastering chain.
It's really great, especially the B setting.
Good.
B setting's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's exactly,
the B setting's fantastic. Yeah.
It's on B setting. It's on fastest tape speed. And it's just hitting 0 most of the time.
That's great.
Sounds, as I said a minute ago, I don't know what it does. Sounds great.
Isn't Softtube also have that one knob saturation? Is that them?
Yeah, that's them.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that thing.
Yeah. It does it. Softtube knows what's up. Way to go, Sweden.
One knob.
Yeah. Swedes know what's up. They don't have all those hit records for nothing.
Yeah.
Those are the three that I really like and have tried out. I don't know. I've tried them all, I think.
But I'm guessing.
I mean, there's new ones coming out all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like there's. We were just talking about it the other day, Jake.
Yeah.
The new one from Mixlane.
Oh, the one that's the Sony one.
The digital tape machine. Yeah, the Sony machine. And that one, I still have to try that one out. I'm curious to, what it does. I'm sure it does something, but of all the 3, 4, 5 dozen other tape machine plugins out there, is it worth it?
Well,
I don't know.
You're bringing up something really important here. So, for me, the reason that I choose to use this machine and I like I said, the two main machines that I have in my room right now are that Tascam 388 8-track, which is like a mixer. If you can't see it, obviously, because we're listening to a podcast, it's a mixer with an 8-track 1/4-inch thing. It's a very not what's considered professional. It's a very mid-fi, very interesting sounding machine. And then the Tascam 440. The reason I have those two machines is that there's no mistaking that they sound like tape. Studers are incredible. Even later MCIs, very cool machines. That Otari that I was talking about before, the 1-inch 8-track, those weren't engineered to sound like tape. They were trying to get rid of all the things that I wanted back. They were trying to make it as clean as possible. And it doesn't mean they don't sound good. They sound incredible. It's just that if I'm recording to tape in this day and age and going through the hassle, I don't want there to be any mistake that this is tape. In the same way that in an old movie, there's no mistake that it was on film. It's the same exact thing. There's zero mistake. You're not like, man, did they do that on film? I can't. No, you can tell because look at all the frame burn and the weird stuff that happens. Like, I want those artifacts. I would sometimes pray for tape dropouts, these things that they were trying to avoid like the plague in the back, where they would literally, because of the wearing of the tape, you have these little dropouts. When you're doing things like trying to recreate things like dub reggae, I'm wearing a Lee Scratch Perry shirt. Like, that's one of my heroes. When you're trying to recreate dub, like things like tape dropout just add to it. You're like, yes, I lost something for 1 second and it sounded exactly like a tape machine would act. You don't always want that, but there's times where the artifacts, the noise, the saturation, the pushing it, burying the needle, not always, but sometimes that's the thing, and the emulations just don't do that. One of the reasons is that the emulations are a snapshot. I was just talking to someone who is a plugin developer, and he was talking about, the capabilities of AI being able to emulate nonlinearities over time, because they can take long-form snapshots. You could tell AI, I want you to listen to this tape machine for 9 hours and then give me permutations based upon electrical currents, the differences, the drop and sag, the component differences between channels, all these things that would probably, burn out a programmer. I mean, I don't know. This is where I really don't know anything. But the idea that if it could actually capture the nonlinearities and the things that make things not bad, but different and kind of throw things off, then maybe we can get to a point where the emulations actually do the thing. Because as they stand right now, with my limited understanding, these are momentary snapshots.
Yeah.
This is a state of the machine as it related to this thing. This is an impulse response. And impulse responses aren't a 9-hour. If you think of it in terms of science, it's not. It's a very small sample size. You're not getting the conclusion that you would get from a machine or a console.
No, and you're not getting if you've spent 4 hours recording in that studio onto your tape, you've got all those different permutations that are happening all the time.
Right. And now if we could just emulate what it's like when the drummer's had his third beer, then we'll see. Yeah, that's the plug-in.
It's probably better than when he first got there, to be brutally honest.
Yes, but the 4th and a half beer is where we run into troubles.
Well,
it's all over now.
I use Addictive Drums, and there's a timing knob in there where you can actually make the drummer play a little bit sloppier.
What about when he
miss some of the beats?
There should be something in that plugin where he gets an off-putting text from his girlfriend. That would be
so addicted drums instead of addictive.
Yeah, addicted
or he's
drums,
brought his girlfriend with him to the studio.
Or their boyfriend. Yep.
Or their boyfriend.
Yeah, man. Oh man, that would see. There we go. If you can create, I've always had this idea for plugins that create the wildness of the studio session and what can happen and how that changes the human aspect. That's what we're missing as we're sitting here looking for a snare drum at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m.
But I guess the bit that the thing I'm definitely taking away from this is all of the plugin, most of the plugins, they do something, they sound great.
Yeah.
But they will never, even if they have gone down the AI route and they've got, 4 days worth of data they can go through, they're never going to do the commit in the beginning that you talked about. The performance of you are recording it to tape. No, you can't put it on the grid. You can't time align it. You can't. They're never going to do that.
No,
I don't. That's the takeaway. That
at least not in the foreseeable future. Maybe one day.
Well, you can create those situations though. So, it takes discipline, but you can create those situations inside your DAW. I've made 8-track templates where I say, I don't have anything else. If I want anything else, I have to bounce it.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Yeah. And I'll set up the channel strip where alls I have is, if you want to try this as an experiment, you can say, alls I have, I want it, I love this record. Well, think about, this is getting into my other work. Let me digress for a second. So one time I had a thing where a friend said, I'm doing a thing where he's doing a documentary. He was scoring a documentary about the actor Montgomery Clift. So we needed to hit something from the 30s. And he needed to do this thing from the 30s. And he said, well, it really needs to sound like that for the movie to work. So I said, okay, you need to get your performers. It was a 3-piece. We're going to do it from one microphone at distance, a ribbon, and we still did it in the box. We're going to do it at distance, one ribbon. We're going to mix it by you guys moving back and forth, and or it was 2. We did 2 with 2 performers. We're going to mix it like that. It has to be that way. And then that's the way that we ended up doing it. If I recall correctly, that's how we ended up doing it. And using those limitations, you could still do that. If you wanted to say, what was it like to record, in 1970, say, okay, well, my only compressors are going to be 1176 Blues, a Fairchild. Thank God you have access to those emulations. They're great emulations. A Fairchild, LA2As, and Pultex. And that's all you use. And an EMT plate. That's it. Make a record. It's going to get closer than if you're like, should I try this baby audio thing? And should I try this? And maybe I should. But I did pay for that output subscription. Those choices, when you start to have those choices come into your head, if you've been doing this for any amount of time, you have the plugins you use and the plugins you bought.
Yeah.
And those aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
One of those is the same thing as the other, but the other one sure isn't, right? No. We have probably a couple tape machines worth in money of plugins that we didn't. Just was just death by 1,000 cuts. We probably have we probably all have about a new Trident consoles version of plugins sitting in our thing
And if I could resell my plugins for a Trident console, I would do it now.
Well, why? But this brings up an extra thing. Why?
Yeah. Because I want that. I want that workflow. So I came up in a time when I didn't have. Yeah. I didn't work in a studio. I didn't work on consoles. I started out with a Tascam Porta Studio 414. I think that was the number. I can't remember. That was as close as I got to ever touching a mixing console. For real, not just like, sitting at Sweetwater and be like, oh, look at this, I have my hands on the faders.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like really working on a console. So like I missed that part of coming up in sort of my audio education, if you could call it that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would absolutely trade in all of my unused plugins for a real desk and the heartache that comes along with, physical connections to components and cabling and all of that jazz.
Well, I think you could handle it.
that.
I think you could handle it because of your tech background. But I also want to say that, one of the heartache things that happens, and one of the reasons that a lot of people abandon it, I suspect, is that even with recall, if you're doing, it's really hard to do this professionally unless you're making your own stuff or you're doing things really specifically. With the expectations of modern clients, it's extremely difficult to have that workflow because you need to recall. And
Yeah.
we have this expectation where they can call you after they'll text you when they're in a drive-through somewhere saying, you know what, I've decided that hi-hat is going to ruin my life. You got to bring it down a quarter dB or I'll never be able to face my family again. And that's it. So
Very real life and death decisions on a hi-hat.
And by the way, it's going to mastering tomorrow. So I'm really going to need you to stop your life to do this. And now, in general, if it's in your session, it's in Studio One in your case, okay, now I'm back to my dinner. If it's on a console,
Yeah.
and you're never going to get it exactly the same. Some of my favorite memories are working in a studio that had a console with no recall. And I would tell everybody that before we made a record. I'd say, listen, when it's gone, it's gone. Like, there's nothing we're going to do. Like, it's gone. And sometimes that, like the tape machine, forced a great mix because you actually had to perform the mix. Imagine that. Sometimes you had to have multiple.
Well, that's the thing, man.
Yeah, perform a mix.
Yeah.
Like that.
Fading the reverb in and out. And
yeah. I love that. Because you mess up and it's like, oh, you got to rewind the tape. And you got to you got to sit there, especially when it's on tape. That was my plugin idea, was to have a plugin that when you got to the end of a song that you had to wait the time it would take for you to rewind the tape. Because here's the other thing here's an unseen benefit of tape. You get a break. There's no setting it to an 8-bar loop and then deciding that you should never, ever have made music ever. Ever in your life. You should, you set the 8-bar loop. It's 11 p.m. You finally have time to work on it. Man, you are finally creating the thing that your soul asked you for. Flash forward to 2 a.m. where your subconscious is telling you, why did you ever think you could ever make music? And that's because of the 8-bar loop.
And you hear that snare drum for the next 2 days in your head.
No, but the perspective of sitting there and having to rewind, your brain reconnects with the music and you fall in love with it again. Because you have to wait. You can't just do this thing and you're not on the 80th snare sample. You can't just do this thing. So it's really useful in that way, in that it creates perspective and it gives everyone a break and it gives your ears a break. My favorite quote about recall was the one when the SSM, and this might be a legend, but I love this quote, is when the automation and recall came out for SSL, and Ringo Starr, when they said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" He said, "Why would I want to recall a bad mix?" Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I love that idea, and sometimes that's really great. You say, okay, this is the mix. And I don't know if you guys have a controller when you're mixing, but if you perform a mix for real and don't just draw the automations in, really cool stuff happens.
I have a fader port 16.
Yeah, so do I. So it's sitting in front of me. Same thing. Yeah, same deal.
And fader port there. Yep. I love it to death. I love performing my automations, and sometimes I miss my cue or I react too slowly. Sometimes I might fix it, and other times I'm like, hey, that actually works. I didn't hit the swell perfectly, but it's fine, So there's the human aspect of it.
If you haven't already, Nate, try this. Do that same thing, but don't go into latch or touch or draw. Do that and actually just have an output of your 2-track into another track. And literally record what you're doing. Save your mix, because then you can go back to the static thing that you were at the beginning.
Yeah.
But literally sit there and perform it into the 2-track and see if that's different. What's
so obviously the viewers can't see this, but this is the UAD Delver pedal.
Yeah.
And so it's basically a Lexicon 224 emulation, couple of different models in here. And a couple of different delay options. They have a tape EP3 delay, analog, Memory Man delay, and then UAD's precision delay. Anyway, sometimes I'll run out of my output into this guy.
Yeah.
And then I'll perform, the reverb options, the mix, things like that. And it'll write back into the track. This is a ton of fun because there is no going back. You have to rewind and start over again.
Well, I mean, for a lot of engineers for the longest time, earlier I mentioned my affinity for dub reggae and pioneers like Lee Scratch Perry and King Tubby. The mixing console was their instrument, full on.
Yeah.
If you ever saw how they actually did it, like they are playing it in time, they're dropping things out, they're arranging in real time, and that stuff, it changed how music was made completely, and that was out of necessity. It was just like, an innovation and
how it was
and a lot of fun, because you also, when you don't have those safety guards, I do that performing it to tape. I'll perform mixes literally to tape that way. And I won't even have it recapturing into the DAW because I want to be hearing the input, and then, I'll go back and then repro, and I'll then record the whole sequence of the mixes I did and then choose from there. And they're all really different. And some of them I might do a very different balance. And some of it, when you're not thinking of it in terms of, okay, I have this architecture of this timeline that I built up over 8 hours, and I can't touch the snare to do it. Well, yeah, you can. Like, go and listen to your favorite songs and realize that the choices are much bolder than you think. The balances are much more askew than you think on your favorite songs. Has anyone ever said, I'm going to once again recall Motown just because people still fall in love to it 60 years later. They still have it at their wedding, right? They still do all these things. Even younger people still listen to it. Anyone's like, man, that tamborine's just too much. No one ever says that. But go back and focus on it. That tamborine's ripping your face off.
Yeah. Yeah, there were no subtle moves back then, were they? It was up or it was down. It wasn't down a little bit or up a little bit. It was up or it was down.
It's like, so have you ever checked out, you were talking earlier about going to Abbey Road. Have you ever checked out the 4-track stuff, even though it was 2 synced 4 tracks, but the Sgt. Pepper stuff?
Yeah.
And the broken out 4 tracks. So at some point, they had to decide, Ringo and Paul, all of your stuff's on 1 track. And that's it. There wasn't any going back. And has anyone ever said, man, that bass and drum sound on it's getting better all the time. Like, that's terrible. We need to go back and fix that. Never. They made those choices on the ultimate commitment. When you only have 4 tracks, then you better be ready. Like, people talk about Pet Sounds. What blows my mind about Pet Sounds is that all the instruments are on 1 track on most of those.
Really?
It's a Scully 283 track, another machine that if I could get a Scully in here, I'd be very happy. A Scully 283 track is what I understand, or I believe so. And I think the instruments were all done on 1 track, background vocals and lead vocals.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's crazy though, isn't it? To think of it today.
It's an orchestra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they mixed by depth of field and playings, how soft they were playing, arrangement. This is getting back to another benefit of the process of tape. Don't go to the tape machine with a shit song. Don't do it. You're not going to like it. Yeah. I mean, don't go to a DAW with a shit song either, but definitely don't go to a tape machine with a shit. You better, if you can't draw emotion out of it with an acoustic guitar, a piano, or just a voice, then you might as well not turn the thing on. It's not the thing to turn on to screw around to see if you can get that sick loop. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not its job, is it? That's not what it's there for.
No, it's there to capture performance. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So do you think it highlights more than recording into a DAW when the song is not strong? Do you think it highlights that if your song's not strong, it will sound less strong as soon as you commit to tape?
I don't think that it ultimately hides it any more than a DAW does. I just think it lets you know that you're fooling yourself quicker.
Ah, interesting.
Because you can't try like 6 sample pack 6. Like you can't, it doesn't work. You can't call up splice. I mean, you could and send it to a channel. Like that's not a problem. But I'm saying that like, I think that it's just going to let you know that this ain't happening.
Yeah.
There was a time where like you weren't going into a studio and recording onto a professional recorder unless you were at a certain level. It was really expensive.
Yeah.
Like I said, the rates were more than they are now back then. There was some like a session that I saw, like a Bob Marley thing at the record plant, and it was like $250 an hour or something, like $250 an hour in 1975 or 6 or something like that. And I'm like, you'd be hard pressed to find a room now that is that. I mean, you'll find some. You'll find some at the top end, but you can get incredible studios with Neve 1070, 1073 or 1081, whatever desks for $800, $900 a day. Like not many, but you can find it. Maybe $1,100, $1,200 a day more, but like it's crazy. So to think about how much money you truly had to have to step into a studio relative to the inflation and all that back then.
You were ready, weren't you? That's the point. You were ready.
You were ready, or someone had a lot of money.
Yeah. The days of writing a record in the studio. Yeah.
Oh, that also necessitates
the amount of
budgets.
time it takes, the amount of money it takes, the amount of time it takes. If you've got a shit song, it's not worth it.
It's not worth it.
No.
So you rather than like on your digital audio workstation, you can record whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think I think the plugin companies, and I think that there's an entire industry based upon fooling people into thinking that this plugin's going to write that tune. That this plugin's going to. You have the barrier to entry for quality recording of bad things is really low. Like we can make pristine recordings of things that maybe shouldn't have been recorded. And I think that that's fine. I'm not saying it's a gatekeeping thing. I think any artist, like the vast majority of the things I make aren't that great. Like that's the secret. Like you just have to make a lot of it, and then some of it's good. Like that's the way that it goes. But the key is that the time that people are spending debating about which tape machine plugin is the best might be better used towards like writing 6 more songs. We do this so much as a culture online where it's like, okay, yes, you're right. Like you win. This Bricasti emulation is better than all the others. But in the time you spent debating that with, Neve Lover 84 online, like it's like, what happens? What happens in that time period, and why weren't you writing?
Yeah, or playing,
And I think that's the problem. I think with the culture, and I think that there's not to get into a much different topic, but I think that that's the idea, and I guess that kind of brings me to the point where like I don't know if tape is better. I just know it's better for me. Like it might be worse. I don't know. It's irrelevant. It's what I do and I enjoy. It amuses me to sit here and tinker with these things and then make things, with varying degrees of success.
I think it's amazing how every time we speak to someone like yourself, or when we had Warren on, or when we had Lee on, it's amazing how everybody says they commit at the beginning, right? So these guys are recording in the box predominantly with all the plugins in the world. I mean, especially if you want to hear
both of those guys at extremely high levels. Yeah. Their thing is exactly what you say you love about tape, and their message is still the same. You have to commit on the way in. Don't record a DI and then I've tried 56,000 different guitar amps emulations down the line. Everybody's message is the same. Get your song right, get your performance so you can perform it when you record it, and commit on the way in. It's amazing how everyone we talk to says the same thing.
Because then you're mixing on the way in too, because you've got the mix in mind as you're recording, or
the mix is done, and it's just it's a formality at that point. I think that you bring up a really great point, that I think there's just such a misconception about that idea. Obviously the old trope, like the idea of fixing it in the mix, and not to go down that road because that's well-worn territory. But what I'll say is that I think that people think they can create the vibe in the mix, not even fix it. I mean, we can fix it in the mix. I can do all kinds of stuff to fix it in the mix. I can shift timing around. I can pitch correct things. I can fix tons of stuff. I can't create in the mix. I can create, unless it's already there. You can enhance in the mix, but is the genesis of something new? Well, I guess with a remix, I'm kind of disproving myself. Yes, you can create in the mix, but it's really hard to create I can't create intention in the mix.
Yeah.
Intention has to be there and vibe has to be there. And I think that's that's why the idea of committing on the way in. There was a really, someone that was really successful at recording. There's very few people that are successful at recording all the instruments on their own. Arguably, one of the people that was most successful at that was Prince, especially early on. And he had something to say about that because he didn't really give away the game a lot. He didn't talk a lot about process or, much, at least as far as I've been able to find. Maybe there are good sources of that. But he talked about how the reason it doesn't work for most people is they don't play hard enough. They're worried when they play the instruments. And they're trying to get a part, and so many people try to record to not mess up.
Yeah.
You should record to mess up. Like, record hard. It doesn't mean you have to make a punk rock song. You can make the smoothest, sexiest R&B and play it hard. That's Prince. You can play the funkiest thing in the world, the most laid back thing in the world, and you can play it hard. And hard in this case doesn't always mean velocity. It means that intention behind it, not being scared of yourself, not being scared of perception while you're doing it. If you're committing without fear, then you have a chance. You have a chance of other people feeling your bravery on the other end or your vulnerability, because they're the two sides of the same coin. Being that way, and I think once again, bringing it back to the subject of what we're talking about, is that tape sometimes will maybe nudge you towards that behavior a little quicker if you're doing straight up tape stuff, or you have that mentality about you when you're going into your DAW.
Wow,
I like that.
that's a great statement.
Oh, cool.
I think too many people, and I know I've done it when I've been in the studio. Your first thought is not to mess up.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do. That's not how magic happens. Magic happens when you just go in and play.
Yeah, Leonard Bernstein said, "I've never seen a statue of a critic."
It's very true. Somebody's going to make one now. Though you'll find one in the world. Everything's been disproved on the internet.
I doubt it. I doubt it off my words, but I think that he'll take it off Leonard Bernstein's words. But I think that that's it. But I think that that also extends to inner criticism.
Yeah.
I think that people have this idea that they'll get to a certain place with their mixing where that voice will go off. That I know how to mix, and I'm not going to have that feeling anymore, or I'm going to produce and I'm not going to have that feeling anymore. I'm going to master. And then the reality is that you have to get insanely comfortable with the fact that that's an ever retreating phantom, to use the Alan Watts term. You're never catching up with that. That's going to be constantly receding. The trick isn't to try to jump on the phantom long enough to feel good about yourself. The trick is to get insanely comfortable with the fact that what is beautiful about this pursuit is that perfection is not only unattainable, it's actually deeply undesirable, because it means you've reached a terminus in something where the journey is the actual thing that we're in love with. We just don't always know it.
I mean, okay, so I've been doing this I've been playing music my entire life, but I've been doing the recording thing for 8 to 10 years. And I remember in 2020, 2021, I finally kind of understood some of the basics, but I was far from understanding everything else, really. I knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to feel like I was actually doing the thing that I wanted to do. And, drinking from the YouTube fire hose and absorbing all this information and trying to chase what I thought was the perfect sound or, the perfect insert word here, whatever it might be. And now, 8 to 10 years down the road and 2 kids and lots of time invested and lots of curse words and tears and money spent on things and things sold. And I actually wonder if, I was trying to chase this phantom and I wasn't enjoying the journey of, trying to figure out where my place was in all of this.
Yeah. I think,
and I don't think I have it all figured out yet now, but I feel like I'm a lot wiser, and I wish I could go back to, Nate 8 years ago and be like, hey man, chill out. It's gonna be all right.
There's nothing you could have done for that person.
Enjoy the ride.
There's nothing.
Yeah,
there's nothing you could have done for that person because you have to go through it, and you're going to still go through it. You're gonna hit a point where you think that I'm pretty snazzy at this. And then you're going to hit a point where you think that you should have never done this, and that's okay. And it might not be that extreme. I'm being a little bit extreme about it. The trick is that those peaks and valleys kind of level out, I think, usually as you get experience, because you realize that like it's audio, like this, you're not going into a burning building, folks. Like, it's okay. Like, it's all right. Like, it's not that serious. My brother jumps into the ocean to save people. I don't do that. I distort tape machines. Everybody calm down. Like, it's
like battling what we've talked about on this podcast before, imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's huge. But here's the thing that what's the greatest relief from imposter syndrome? No one cares about you in the way that you think they do.
Well put.
No one, literally no one. No one cares. They don't care. Unless you're at a very, very certain level, the reality is that no one is checking in on whether or not you're actually who you think you are at any given moment. Your family cares about you. They love you. Your friends care about you. They love you. There might be other people that care about you and love you, but they are not thinking about you that way. They don't care about your record. Even if they cared about your record, that's not all they care about that day. Say you're huge, right? Say I thought that the last, Megastar's record was not the thing, right? Am I sitting there stewing about it at 3 a.m.? No, I'm thinking about my own shit, right? And like everybody else. So the imposter syndrome thing is definitely real. I've gone through it in ways where it almost like just like drug me down into a hole and probably did a couple times. But the reality is that it's really good to remind yourself that no one cares, and that's beautiful.
Yeah.
No one cares, and that's okay.
And Instagram makes you think that people care. No one cares.
Nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
You know what? Do a little experiment. Unless you have like 100,000 followers, go off Instagram and see if anybody, even your closest friends, send you a message saying, bro, where you been? I needed those updates. I needed those stories. They don't need it from you. And some people, that might be depressing to some people, but realize that that's liberating. No one cares at all. And that's how you kill imposter syndrome. Because
well, look at that,
and the people. Well, at least I don't know. I don't think that's how you kill it. I think that's. But what I was going to say is that the people that you love aren't better than you. The people that you admire aren't better than you at this. They've simply had the guts to be themselves. And I think that's the scary part. I mean, the guts to really be themselves. We celebrate individuality in ways that we don't even understand. And we celebrate, it's not because they're willing to work super hard and be themselves. There's a lot of combinations. That's not the only reason, but that's usually for me the defining factor. Is why when we really, really, really love someone, it's because they've had the guts to say, this is authentically me. This is who I am. When someone is shiny for a little bit, but they're not really them, we forget about them. But when they're authentic, when they're authentically themselves in the way that they go about producing, in the way that they go about, making art, no one's ever going to be like, man, I really wish Bowie would have tried harder. Like he gave it all. He did it. He was the art, right? And that's why he's so celebrated, right? He's so celebrated because was everything a slam dunk? Like, nah, man. Like some of it was like, okay, I don't need to listen to that. He probably felt the same way. And your mixes from 8 years ago, Nate, I bet, like, you ever go back? Does anybody here ever go back and the thing that kept them up at 3 a.m., you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Or, no, that really was bad. I was right. But usually... Yeah,
no, I've listened to some of my early mixes, and no, legitimately, they're crap, but I don't feel terrible about it like I did then, like worrying about, like, how do I make this sound X, Y, and now I'm like, yeah, it sucks. I don't care, whatever.
Yeah, like the music that I made back when in my Pro Tools SE days when you had like 8 tracks and that's all you had, no mix window, no nothing. And... I go back and listen to that. I'm like, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but who cares?
Yeah, I've been through. I don't know. I think we all. I think you have to go through that stuff. You have to go. Usually, because anybody that I've ever met that like has none of that, I'm not compelled to listen to their work. They're not good or bad. It's just that usually it's not like, oh man, that's amazing. Or it's a personality thing. I think there's some people that just aren't affected by these things, and they're taking it like a job. I've met people that are like really much like, this is my job. I go, even like songwriters. I go in, I write songs, I go eat my lunch, I go back and I write songs, and that's it. They're not attaching to it in the same way where they're this like tortured artist, like, oh, I'm no good and no one likes me. They're just not built like that. I think just a lot of us are.
There's something about that mentality that I really admire when I come across a songwriter who talks about their life, their work like that. I'm like, that there's something envious about that.
It's massively.
They are detached.
Show me how. Yeah.
And the confidence they have in like, oh yeah, I wrote like 3 songs this afternoon. You know?
Yeah. I don't get attached to mixes anymore. I used to take it as a personal failure if a client came back and started to pick it apart. I've realized that this is a matter of taste. And it doesn't constitute failure. I failed to meet their expectations, but then as long as I'm willing to do my level best, it's not a reflection that it's not all of a sudden invalidating every effort I've made up to this point in audio, which is the way I used to feel about it. Particularly when, what cured me of that is working with ad agencies. That'll clear.
That's another episode.
That'll clear that right up. Anything that you thought you were great or you thought you were terrible, you're both at any given time and in the ultimate extreme, and you have 3 hours to prove it otherwise. Or 1 hour. Like that'll cure you. You start to detach pretty easily. Not detach. You just start to realize that the consequences aren't what you thought they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to do an episode on your work with ad agencies and libraries and publishing.
Sure,
and all that
if you want to.
That's a whole nother world that I think a lot of people might be interested in.
I almost never use tape for those jobs.
I would imagine you don't.
So the non-tape episode will be next.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I almost never use tape for those. I do sometimes for an effect, but it's never the print because I learned the hard way.
Well, so let's ask you a couple questions and then we'll wrap it up. So what is your DAW of choice or the DAWs that you use? And obviously one of them being, your Tascam 388 behind you or, a tape machine if you're going into sort of a semi-DAWless workflow. But what workstation do you predominantly work in?
Digital audio
workstation? Yeah, digital. Yeah. What digital? Yeah, I jump around a lot actually. Probably too much because I never get to learn things as well as I could. I've used them all, but where I'm in Logic world right now, simply because I've used Pro Tools in studios. I've used Logic. I've used Cubase. I've used Nuendo. Right now, I primarily use Logic. I switched to Logic when I started composing for film and TV because it's a fantastic program for that. Pro Tools is. I scored a movie in Pro Tools and I will never do that again. That was awful. Although it might be very different now. Maybe it's great. I don't know. I left.
Probably
not. So
it's the same.
Yeah, I'm sure. Probably not.
Yeah, I've used Studio One and enjoyed it. But then I had some weird compatibility issues. So Logic has been the most solid for me. A lot of times I'll write in Ableton. Ableton is an incredibly immediate program to write music in for me. I can understand how but I think it's just for me it's absolute misery to mix in or produce like in that sense. I can do it and I've done it. I'll break things out and send it to Logic. I also really, really, really have loved Luna like a lot, like a whole lot. My problem with it is that they've seemed to kind of just be like, yeah, maybe. We'll get to it. And I know they constantly update it, but one of the major things that it doesn't have is hardware integration, which, as we've mentioned for a lot of reasons, is like, I need that real bad, or all these cool things I have don't work. So right now, the very short answer without all of it is Logic and Ableton are the primary ones getting opened here.
What's the one plugin that you can't live without? You're not allowed to have the built-in EQ or compressor from your DAW of choice.
Plugin I can't live without. I can just pick one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You could
Desert Island.
You could pick a. I think our last guest picked the entire Sound Toys.
Yeah, you have to.
Suite.
Yeah. So, all right, I will probably say that the one that I have to use and kind of have on hand is usually Pro Q3. But I'm just because I can't not, I'm going to give an honorable mention. I'm breaking rules. Console 1 is really important to me.
Okay.
It's an important part of my workflow.
And that's from Soft too,
yeah.
the core mixing console.
Yeah. Well, I use a couple different of the desks emulations in there. They're really great. I will echo the Sound Toys thing. I always say that when you don't know what to do with a mix, Sound Toys does.
It's an incredible.
Yep.
And there's never been a time where I'm like, oh man, I really shouldn't have put Echo Boy on that. Like, it's like, no, it wanted Echo Boy really bad, and they're my favorite plugin company because they're like, yeah, we're going to release a plugin every 9 years. We're never going to bother you. We're never going to advertise to you. We're going to run some specials. If you want to buy it, here it is. It's the same thing for the last 20 years. Nothing else does it as cool as this. And no, we're not really going to update it all that much. But yeah, we have some cool things, everyone. Oh, by the way, here's this plate plugin that's amazing. Here's the, and it'll just, and they're just kicking it in Vermont in like a barn, I imagine, or something, with all this cool stuff surrounding them, and they just kind of do their thing. I love that, how unsalesy they are, and I just think that as a company, they're the best. They rule.
It's refreshing for sure. With all of the plug-in emails that I get.
Yeah. I imagine Bernie Sanders stops by, maybe Ben and Jerry, maybe it's the members of Fish. Like whoever's hanging out in Vermont at any given time is probably hanging out at Sound Toys. I know that those are the only Vermonters I could say. Apologies to Vermont.
Well, and they must all be wearing like Birkenstocks. Right?
I don't know.
That's what
I feel like I feel like the people at Sound Toys are wearing Doc Martens. I don't know why.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I don't feel like they're wearing Birkenstocks. They might. Maybe the one guy in marketing. Call him.
Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe there's only two people that work there. I don't know if anybody works there. Maybe it's just an empty building. I don't know. All's I know.
It's been taken over by AI.
It's just AI's been running Sound Toys forever. It's part of the simulation. Yeah. Anyway, I love Sound Toys, obviously, and truly. That's it. And there's other ones that show up on every single mix, but those are the ones.
Well, maybe Sound Toys needs to make a tape plugin.
Hey, listen, if anybody can do it,
we can be a good one.
We can look for the latest Sound Toys drop in 2032 when they come out with it, man. It's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready. We're only 7 years away, guys.
Yes, I can hold on.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, it's all right. AI is going to do all our mixing anyway. It's okay. We're fine.
Jake, man, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and talking about tape and sort of, letting us into your world with that. There's so many things to take away. But if anyone has any questions, can they contact you to run their song through your tape machine to get a feel for what a real tape machine does versus a plugin?
I'm absolutely for hire as a mastering engineer and for analog processing, and they can reach out. It's totally fine. You can give my email out. It's just jake@jakefadermusic.com. If they want to know more about what I'm doing at Other Animal, just look at otheranimalmusic.com. That's fine. Find me on the Instagrams. But yeah, absolutely. My services are here for that type of thing. And the thing is, if anybody ever wants to do that, I'll give them an honest assessment of whether I think their music will benefit from it. Sometimes there's things that maybe wouldn't, and and they'll say, hey, yeah, I think this would really, really help out, or this would be a cool addition to the project.
And for anyone who might be on the fence, if they wanted to capture some mojo, Jake, I do believe that at least one song that you passed through your tape machine won a Grammy.
Grammy nomination. Yeah.
Oh, Grammy nomination.
Yeah, but that's okay.
No, that's all right. Yeah. That's fine.
So, that was, the performance, geez. And that was because of the amazing Dan Millis had me on that, my favorite mastering engineer.
Yes.
And, just all around great human being, Dan Millis, was so gracious to ask me to work on this project with the amazing Bella Fleck and the Blind Boys of Alabama. And that thing would have been nominated for a Grammy if it was recorded on notes on an iPhone. I'm happy to be a part of it. I'm glad that Bella Fleck was really happy with I know he was happy with the tape sound. We went through a lot of tape formulations for that one and alignments. We did a lot of different things to kind of make sure we got the right thing. But I firmly believe that the performance and Dan's wonderful work is what made that, and the other production team is what made that do what it did. But gosh, it was like as soon as I pulled, that was one of those rare moments that when I pulled the faders up for the first time, I got chills. I was like, whoa, I'm super honored to work on that. And when it got nominated for a Grammy, I was like, I was blown away.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. So full circle moment though, the performance matters, right? So it really matters how it's going into tape. It's not just slap down a couple of instruments and send it through tape. It's swing for the fences, take your best shot, and then put it on tape.
Not to draw things out, but I just want to say that I think that matters no matter the genre. I think that matters no matter, it's not just, you need to capture the performance the way that, they used to in blah, blah, blah year. No, I think that it doesn't matter if you're doing the most modern hip hop or rap, or it doesn't matter if you're doing the most modern house music. It doesn't matter. The performance is everything. It's hard to take, it's really hard to take a bad picture of something truly beautiful. It's difficult. And when a song and a performance is beautiful, like, it's only yours to mess up. You can make it really truly stunning with the technique of recording, but you also you can get tricked by when you work with really good people, you can get tricked saying, I'm really good at this. Well, no, they're just really good at doing what they're doing. Yeah. And then you get your first band that isn't that level, and you're going, I'm not very good at this. Anyway, So I think everyone can probably relate to that, But that was that's one of those things. I think that performance and the material. It's is everything. It's everything. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So. Wow, Jake, thank you so much for your time. It's been a lovely conversation. Wonderful hanging out with you and laughing and learning new things.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. What a fun time. What a fun time. Yeah.
All right.
Amazing.
Wow.
What a dude.
What a great guy. He's
that was
super
cool. I didn't think I'd have very much to say, and I didn't have that much to say, but because I've never recorded to tape before.
Yeah, I mean, what
an interesting guy. Though.
What an interesting concept.
He's a cool
tape,
dude,
though. Talk about something that's been so it was the medium, right? Yeah, and now it's an effect. It's a part of the process. It's not the process.
And I think it's so hilarious that back in the day with tape, they were trying so hard to make it so clean, and now we're trying to dirty it again. Yeah, we're trying to bring it back. It's like, I want that hiss. I want
all of the things that people were trying to get rid of, like tape hiss. Everyone wants it back in spades. Although I think we're getting to the point where I'm hearing a lot of times people turn off the tape hiss again. We're getting back to that sort of getting rid of that hiss noise. But yeah, man, what a fascinating conversation. And
that was cool.
I'm glad we had that conversation to round out season 1 of Sound Discussion.
Who'd have thought we'd get this far?
Who would have thought? 12 episodes. What a ride.
Amazing guests.
Yeah. I think it's been a great year. I hope. I think it's been a great year. I hope that others feel that way.
It's been an amazing year.
I think that we have a lot of really cool ideas coming up in season 2, so look out for that starting in January. And if there's anybody out there that thinks we should have a particular guest or tackle a particular subject, please let us know. Drop an email to sounddiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Just let us know who you would want to hear. Whether or not we can get them, that's a whole other story, but we'll reach out to them and we'll ask them if they would be on our podcast. So, and if you have a connection to somebody who you think would be a great guest, let us know that too. Because, that is how we produce this content is through the magic of connections. So let us know if there's somebody out there that you'd like to hear on this podcast, or a subject that you would like to hear about on this podcast, and we'll do our best to make it happen.
I think subject's the one for me. Subject's the one for me. I'd love to know what people want us to talk about.
What do people have questions about? What are they spending inordinate amount of time Googling that might be better served by a discussion? I know that's a question, or that's a thing that I think about. Is I'm spending a lot of time Googling something. I'm going to go seek out a subject matter expert and listen to them talk about it, because I'll probably get my answer that way rather than searching the internet.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, is we'd find someone who knows what they're talking about rather than just the three of us
blabbing on for an hour.
We'll find someone who knows what they're talking about to come in and talk about it.
Well, so those shenanigans and more are coming up in January. But until then, I hope that everyone has a wonderful holiday season. Warm by the fireplace, maybe the warm glow of your analog equipment, those tubes, put some gloves on and just warm up underneath the heat of those tubes, or if you have a tape machine. And if you don't have any of those, there's always plugins.
Yeah, that'll keep you
warm. And maybe your wallet emptier.
Wallet emptier.
But nevertheless, I wish everyone a warm, happy, safe, healthy holiday and new year. And we'll see you for season 2 in January. Thank you for listening to Sound Discussion. Your hosts are Ben Holmes, Neil Merchant, and me, Nate Kelms. Our theme song is composed and recorded by Jojo Timmerman. You can find us on the internet at sounddiscussionpodcast.com, or you can drop us a line at sounddiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Additional show notes for this episode can be found on our website or in the description area of your podcast player. A big thank you to our guest for taking the time to chat with us today, and to you, the listener, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of our discussion. We look forward to having you join us again next month on another episode of Sound Discussion.
Why would someone be a blacksmith at a Renaissance fair? Kind of like that. We have machines that make the metal,